Is the Nikon Z6 still worth it in 2025? Because this camera came out way back in 2018 as Nikon's first mirrorless camera, but since then we've gotten tons of incredible full frame cameras with specs that surpass the Z6. And with these cameras coming down in price, does it still make sense to buy the Z6? Let's get something straight here, the Nikon Z6 is still a fantastic camera. I've been using the Z6 since 2019 and haven't looked back. Despite me getting the latest Z6 III, I still use my original Z6 regularly as a full frame camera for my telephoto lens when capturing landscape photography, or even when filming B-roll for my content. The Nikon Z6 still hasn't left my sights as a major part of my kit as a Nikon Z photographer. It was a centerpiece of my kit before I got the Z6 III as my main camera body and tackled all the professional work I needed to be done, such as landscape, portraits, events, and even real estate work. It captured each of these niches beautifully without any major issues, while coming out with fantastic images to impress clientele or ensure my high standards for image quality were being met. And image quality is really where the Z6 excelled at, especially being a full frame camera. The 24.5 megapixel sensor always delivered when it came to color reproduction with colors that popped with plenty of contrast. This was especially nice when capturing landscapes, as I would come out with incredibly vibrant images that always had a ton of life to them. One area that this camera killed it in was in dynamic range. I mean, this was arguably the best part of its image quality. When shooting with this camera, I always made sure to expose for the highlights when shooting at ISO 100 during high contrast scenes. This was prominent mainly when shooting landscape photography, when I'd have a sky that was super bright with a dark foreground. By having solid dynamic range, this allowed me to retain more details in both the highlights and shadows. This was huge for me because now I didn't have to worry about the exposure being super off when it came to editing. The Z6 was so good, it even beat out the Z6 III in terms of dynamic range, especially when it comes to noise. When there were very high contrast scenarios, the Z6 III would successfully bring out the shadows with plenty of detail, but would have a bit of noise that made the image less clean. But with the Z6, I rarely saw noise from the shadows and still had tons of detail to work with when editing in Lightroom. The Z6 truly had a great image sensor and a processing system that made capturing high quality images seamless. Something else I really liked about the Z6 was its build. Being a small and compact full frame camera is something I always dreamed about during my DSLR days, and was super stoked for when the Z6 was announced. Gone were the days of carrying around these big, heavy DSLR cameras just because you wanted the best image quality. And even nowadays, the Z6 is still smaller than the original Z6 III and is my go-to when I want a compact camera without sacrificing on the image quality. I personally was a huge fan of the ergonomics when it came out, and with it only weighing 667 grams, it was easy to bring around with me without much of a hassle. Also, I've had this camera since 2019, and I'm happy to report that this camera has held up very nicely over the years and has aged quite well. The body is in overall good condition without any major mechanical issues. Granted, there is some wear and tear around where the rubber is, and that is strictly from use over the years. And there is some rusting around the strap loops, which is to be expected considering this camera is used a lot by the ocean. It makes sense considering all of my work is outdoors, but nonetheless, this camera is in great condition. The Z6 was a very capable camera for professional work back in 2018, and the same can still be said nowadays. I use it for my landscape photography as a second body for my telephoto lens, or whenever I need a second full frame body for my professional work. To put it simply, this camera will not be the reason why you don't get high quality images. I stand by this camera, but the big question at the end of the day is if this camera is still worth it over 7 years later. Although the Z6 is still a fantastic camera and one that I've never had an issue with, the question of it being worth it is a different conversation altogether. Because in a vacuum, the Z6 is a fantastic camera and is still good enough for professional work, and has proven to do so. Just take a look at the work I've been able to produce with it. But since 2018, there's been so many incredible full frame cameras that have been released, like the Nikon Z6 II with dual card slots, 15-minute exposures, and an improved EVF, or the Nikon Z7 that was released alongside the original Z6 that has a 45 megapixel sensor. But the real kicker is that a lot of these great cameras have come down in price since their release and have become very affordable, which makes the Z6 hard to recommend. You have the Z6 II and the Z7 coming in at around $1,000 each used on eBay, while the Z6 is at $700. Both the Z6 II and the Z7 are better cameras than the Z6, and for only $300 more, it might be worth it to splurge to get those extra features. Especially for landscape photography, having that 45 megapixel sensor would help increase the resolution and dynamic range for higher quality images, while the 15-minute exposures make capturing photos over 30 seconds so much easier. Normally, I'm an advocate of saving as much money on camera gear as possible to reinvest it back into your photography. But in this situation, I think it actually makes sense to go with those higher end camera bodies with the better features over the cheaper Z6. This was a much different question when the Z6 II was just released, and the price difference between that and the Z6 was $1,000. But because the price has come down so much, it's not a bad idea to go for the better features. Of course though, if the goal was to get the cheapest full frame camera possible, then the Z6 is a very easy camera for me to recommend. Even though it's cheap in price, it's not cheap in performance, image quality, or build quality, and can stand up to the toughest of photo shoots. I mean, I still use it nowadays, even with my Z6 III being my primary camera. And if you looked at the original Z6 in a vacuum and trying to decide if this camera is worth it for $700 or not, honestly, I think it is. You're getting a fantastic camera that delivers on being a workhorse, and in this economy, you gotta save every dollar you can get. And with the savings on the camera body, you can use it to buy more lenses or use that money to experience more of the world. To me, that's more worth it than any single feature on a camera body. But with that being said, right now is an amazing time to get used camera bodies at a decent price point without needing to break the bank. Especially since the Nikon Z system is much more mature. Getting solid camera gear at a cheaper price point has never been better. However, if I was just getting into the Nikon Z system as a landscape photographer, I would definitely go with the Z7. As having access to 45 megapixels at only $1,000 is an absolute steal and is what I'd probably pick up. But what used Nikon Z camera would you get if you had a choice right now? Let me know down in the comment section down below. Anyways guys, thank you so much for experiencing the world with me today. And if you like this video, feel free to check this one out right here.